The Cuban Missile Crisis was a nail-biting moment that almost led to World War III, and I'm about to show you why it matters more today than ever. Picture this. The year is 1962. The world is on the brink of nuclear annihilation. For 13 harrowing days in October, the United States and the Soviet Union stared each other down, each with their fingers hovering over the nuclear trigger. This wasn't just a Cold War standoff, it was a full-blown crisis that could have rewritten history. Imagine the world holding its breath, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. That's what it was like during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The crisis was sparked by the Soviet Union's decision to secretly place nuclear-tipped missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. This was a direct threat to the United States, and President John F. Kennedy was not going to let it stand. The Soviets, led by Nikita Khrushchev, believed this was their chance to level the playing field after the U.S. placed missiles in Turkey, right on their doorstep. The world watched in horror as the two superpowers edged closer to the abyss. It was a time of unprecedented danger, a time when the fate of humanity hung by a thread. To truly grasp the gravity of the Cuban Missile Crisis, we need to rewind a bit and understand the global chessboard at the time. The Cold War, a decades-long ideological struggle between the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the Communist East, spearheaded by the Soviet Union, was at its peak. Both superpowers possessed enough nuclear weapons to obliterate each other many times over. The Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, a failed attempt by the U.S. to overthrow the communist government in Cuba, led by Fidel Castro, had further inflamed tensions. Khrushchev saw an opportunity to bolster Soviet defenses and deter future American aggression by placing missiles in Cuba. He believed Kennedy was weak and would back down. What Khrushchev didn't anticipate was Kennedy's resolve. The young president, facing the biggest test of his presidency, assembled a group of advisors known as ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, to navigate this crisis. Options ranged from diplomacy to a full-scale invasion of Cuba. The crisis unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. On October 14, 1962, a U.S. U-2 spy plane soaring high above Cuba captured photographic evidence of Soviet missile sites under construction. The images were chillingly clear medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic missiles, capable of reaching the continental United States, were being prepared for launch. The news sent shockwaves through Washington. Kennedy, determined to project strength, addressed the nation on October 22, announcing a naval blockade of Cuba to prevent further Soviet shipments of weapons. He also demanded the dismantling and removal of the existing missiles. The world held its breath. Soviet ships carrying more missiles and equipment were steaming towards Cuba. Would they defy the blockade? Would this escalate into a nuclear exchange? It was a tense waiting game, with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. For days, the world watched as Soviet ships approached the quarantine line established by the U.S. Navy. The tension was palpable. Kennedy and Khrushchev, communicating through letters and back channels, engaged in a dangerous game of brinkmanship. Unbeknownst to the public, a deal was secretly taking shape. Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade the island. There was a second, less-known part of the agreement. The U.S. would also secretly dismantle its Jupiter missiles in Turkey, which had been a thorn in Khrushchev's side. On October 28, Khrushchev announced the withdrawal of the Soviet missiles, averting a nuclear war. The crisis, which had pushed the world to the brink, was over. Section 5. Echoes of a Crisis Past. The Cuban Missile Crisis might seem like a distant historical event, but its lessons resonate powerfully today. In a world still grappling with nuclear proliferation and geopolitical tensions, the specter of that crisis serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace. The crisis underscored the importance of clear communication, diplomacy, and a willingness to seek peaceful resolutions. The back channels established between Washington and Moscow, though rudimentary, proved invaluable in diffusing the crisis. Moreover, the crisis highlighted the catastrophic consequences of miscalculation and the need for leaders to act with restraint and responsibility, especially in the face of existential threats. The world witnessed firsthand how close we came to annihilation, a sobering thought that continues to shape international relations. Section 6. The Price of Miscalculation. One shudders to think what might have happened had either Kennedy or Khrushchev miscalculated the other's resolve. A single spark, a misunderstood message, or an act of aggression could have ignited a nuclear holocaust. The crisis also exposed the dangers of Cold War paranoia and the perils of an arms race that had spiraled out of control. Both superpowers, driven by fear and mistrust, had amassed arsenals capable of destroying the world many times over. The Cuban Missile Crisis served as a wake-up call. It demonstrated that even in the depths of the Cold War, dialogue and diplomacy were possible, and that even seemingly intractable conflicts could be resolved peacefully. Section 7. A world held hostage. Imagine for a moment that the crisis had escalated. Soviet ships defying the U.S. blockade had continued towards Cuba. A tense standoff had erupted on the high seas, with U.S. and Soviet warships facing each other, weapons ready. A miscalculation, a nervous sailor, a stray shot. Any of these could have triggered a chain reaction, leading to a full-blown nuclear exchange. Cities would have been vaporized in blinding flashes, millions would have perished instantly, and countless more would have succumbed to radiation sickness in the ensuing nuclear winter. The very fabric of civilization would have been torn apart. The world as we know it would have ceased to exist. It's a chilling thought, a stark reminder of the devastation that nuclear weapons can unleash. Section 8. The Legacy of a Near Miss. 62 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, its legacy continues to shape our world. The crisis led to the establishment of a direct hotline between Washington and Moscow, enabling rapid communication between leaders to prevent misunderstandings. It also spurred the signing of the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963, which banned nuclear weapon tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and outer space. This was a crucial step towards curbing the nuclear arms race. The Cuban Missile Crisis stands as a testament to the importance of diplomacy, the perils of brinkmanship, and the shared responsibility of nations to prevent nuclear war. It's a lesson we can never afford to forget. As we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, with its own set of geopolitical challenges and nuclear threats, the lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis are more relevant than ever.